Ladies and gentlemen, this is internet personality Vangelus, and the sole Decepticon of 2012 Generations Wave 1 was Shockwave, the Decepticon scientist and all-round logical guy. He rounded out the wave and was easily the most anticipated toy of the bunch by many, myself included. While he isn't a giant laser space gun, this version of Shockwave transforms into the next best thing, an aerodynamic flying alien thing that happens to look like it's wrapped around a giant laser space gun. This really pushes things in the Cybertronian alt mode department, and you need to be open to alien vehicles to even begin to accept it at face value. I like the design, more or less, with its side-swept wing plates, laser cannon core, and huge pink cockpit window. Even the rear is dressed up to look like a thruster array. A weird detail, though, is the fake, half-sunken version of the robot head, chilling out up top despite not being the actual robot head. His little ears are even poking out. Given what it was working with in the source material, I do think Shockwave's alt mode does a good job. The actual transformation process is fine, simple, with a few tricks to spice things up. My problem with it comes down to the rather unreliable plastic tolerances. Some tabs just don't play nice. The rotating panels on his legs seem ready to bend to a breaking point whenever I move them. I don't mind the parts forming of his once integrated cannon weapon, and the automorph head reveal is cute, but it's also a bit mistimed as it happens before the shoulders connect. Overall, I feel the process works, I just wish things came together with a bit more gusto and ka-click. Well, this certainly is a Shockwave, but... One second. There we go. The slingshot cannon can plug onto either forearm and its muzzle can be removed to use it as a triple-barreled gun of nondescript appearance instead. Unfortunately, that muzzle piece likes to fall off a lot, with a micrometer-wide area of grip at the very depth of its shaft. You gotta stuff things in there pretty deep. Weapon aside, Shockwave looks fairly close to the in-game design, but suffers immensely in the construction of his legs. Despite the layered moving parts, it literally looks as though the inner half of each leg was shaved off. Optimus and Jazz did a much better job of covering their economy-necessitated gaps, while Shockwave wears his loudly and proudly, and they aren't really anything to be proud of. From the waist up, I'm much more into his look, although his shoulder line feels a bit too low. Also, his black plastic components really stick out since they're supposed to all be purple in some way. I guess technically black is just the darkest purple. The head sculpt is spot-on Shockwave, though one-eyed hardcores will need to cope with the fact that this version of the character went violet for his optic over yellow. I don't mind, as it light pipes hot, heavy, and vividly. Shockers! His head, being on a swivel joint and on an elevator, makes you think, oh, maybe I can get some tilt out of the elevator, and you kinda can, but the elevator's spring-loaded, so all that is... It just goes back to being all logical. His shoulders are on a swivel that cuts through the sculpted detail. That's because this part of the sculpting is actually clipped into this part of the chest, so it's somewhat forgivable. And he's got an outward hinge here for the bicep. The ball joint of his elbow, it's a lovely ball joint, and due to the transformation, it's also on a hinge. This does mean, though, it's really easy for his arm to start looking like it's a little bit out of whack, a little bit broken at the elbow, like some Dinobot just grabbed it and twisted it and then just said, hey, be on your way. When he doesn't have a huge gun attached to his hand is unposable. It can go like this, due to the transformation, and again, I don't know why you'd want to do that unless Shockwave is going to be all like, frankly, dear, I was walking down to the Green Grocer and I saw a white sports car. Reminded me of myself very much. He had a lapel flower that resembled mine, and I felt faint at heart. Frankly, my dear. He's got no waist joint, unfortunately, and I don't see why he doesn't have a waist joint. There's nothing preventing it. There really should have been a waist joint there. He's got a ball-jointed hip, and right above the knee joint, the single knee joint, he has a mushroom cap swivel, and his feet, due to the transformation, could point down, but the heels are still there, so kind of pointless. He is not unposable. That's kind of the crux of these guys, I guess. But I think that the waist joint was a huge miss, and I really think there could have been one there. As for the plastic quality discussion, this is the guy where I started to feel a negative effect in terms of the economy's impact on Transformers, and that is, he's got the hollow limbs thing going on, but more so than anyone else, instead of just being hollow on one side, his limbs are hollow on two sides. So he's got like a side and a front, but no other side and no back. That really kind of feels like it, because you're grabbing him by the leg all the time. He's naturally got thin legs, and this just makes them feel almost not there. Also, he's constructed using a plastic that just doesn't feel finished as well. It feels more porous. It feels like he's made from a lot of palm plastic as opposed to ABS plastic. And I find that kind of weird. And I think that definitely leads to that tactile feel of this doesn't feel right that some folks would have gotten from these toys. He does have, like, big-ass metal pins here, and he's got pins all over the place. There's no real rhyme or reason to the removal or continued presence of metal in these FOC Deluxes that I've seen. Like, at least none that seems to be universal. It seems to be very case by case. But for whatever reason, Shockwave is the one whose the economy impacts negatively impacted my ability to enjoy the figure. Prime and Jazz, I kind of dug them. They're fun desk toys. Shockwave, I just find he doesn't stand up as well in my hands, because I can actually get flex on the plastic on him. When you're moving this part, it has to kind of like bend a little bit off of the pinned connection, and it doesn't feel quite as right. So Shockwave is the Fall of Cybertron Deluxe that I was able to say, yes, I do see what you guys are talking about, and I agree. More so than on the other two, which is weird because most people ended up liking Shockwave the most. But Shockwave ended up leaving me disappointed. Perhaps there's too much gravitas to the character and I got my expectations out of whack. But I just couldn't get totally into this figure as hard as I tried. I think the lack of polish really came through in a bad way that I was able to get past on Optimus and Jazz, but simply can't overlook in Monsieur Shockers. Which is a shame, as he does have a cool alt mode and a decent robot mode from the waist up. I have warmed up to him a little bit over the last few months, but that's mostly thanks to a combination of recent comic books and a vastly superior remold that goes to show the power of a good coat of paint. But I'll leave that story for another day.